Thank you so much, Keith. Oh, Adam and I, we're so looking forward to this day. We love the Feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And Adam, there's so much to say about this, and we're gonna talk more about what it means for us as having the Blessed Mother as our spiritual mother. I think it's just incredible, and the power of Mary. We did the show last weekend on the spirit world. If you missed it, go back into the archives and pick it up and share the podcast with others. But we also, Adam, we're going to, Tim, our wonderful producer, is going to be posting a CNA article. That's a Catholic news agency. And there's going to be many articles coming out on the Assumption today and the rest of the week. And pick them up from trusted sources like EWTN, Catholic News Agency, and the Register and others. Church Pop does a great job. But this particular article, it's so beautifully written. It's called, they titled it, The Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And Adam, if I may, let me just share the first paragraph from the CNA article that we will post on Facebook. It says, today, Catholics and many other Christians celebrate the feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. This significant feast day recalls the spiritual and physical departure of the Mother of Jesus Christ from the earth when both her soul and her body were taken into the presence of God. I love the way they stated that. Both her soul and her body were taken into the presence of God. And you talk about it all the time, Adam. I know we do in religious education, how intimately connected Jesus and Mary are.
Yes. So there's two layers that might help us unpack some things that were in there that are so beautiful. So let's go to the Catechism, which we often do. We go to Scripture and Catechism. Let's just do a quick reading from paragraph 966 that talks about the Assumption of Mary. Here we go. Finally, the Immaculate Virgin, preserved free from all stain of original sin, when the course of her earthly life was finished, was taken up body and soul into heavenly glory, and exalted by the Lord as Queen over all things, so that she might be the more fully conformed to her Son, the Lord of Lords and conqueror of sin and death. The Assumption of the Blessed Virgin is a singular participation in her Son's resurrection and in anticipation of the resurrection of other Christians. In giving birth, you kept your virginity. In your dormition, you did not leave the world, O Mother of God, but were joined to the source of life. You conceived the living God, and by your prayers will deliver our souls from death. So some people wonder, well, what does this really mean? She was taken body and soul, and why is it important? Why do we have this term, the Assumption of Mary? If we go back to when the dogma of the Assumption was first defined in November 1st of 1950 by Pope Pius XII, paragraph 5 there, he talks about really the critical difference between Mary and other humans when they die. And that is, first, he defines that the normal rule that we're all subject to is our soul separates from our body, and our body is subject to decay here, and our soul goes to its judgment. So then in paragraph 5, let me read that for us. Now God has willed that the Blessed Virgin Mary should be exempted from this general rule. She, by an entirely unique privilege, completely overcame sin by her Immaculate Conception, and as a result she was not subject to the law of remaining in the corruption of the grave, and she did not have to wait until the end of time for the redemption of her body. Okay, so other people had been assumed into heaven, but Mary is unique in her Immaculate Conception, and she was given this grace. So she did die, but we don't know exactly, was it that very moment, was it a moment later, but it was basically right then that she was taken body and soul into heaven. And given her role in the salvation story, it does make sense, given that her body was so important. I mean, think of just the biology of it. Jesus' body, his physical body, was knit from her cells. Her body was the matter upon which the body of Jesus was built, and then he was born. So for God to take that body into heaven and to be in a particular relationship with her Son and the rest of the Trinity in heaven really makes sense. That is a very intimate participation in the incarnation of the Son, part of the Trinity, of the Godhead. And so she is a unique human being, both in her Immaculate Conception, conceived without sin, which makes sense because if the body of Jesus, the God-man, is going to be knit from her body, there can be no stain of original sin in her body or her soul, because a person is a soul and a body brought together. And so it makes sense that there would be no sin there, because how can Jesus be, his body at least, be knit from anything that contains sin? So here we see, truths, I think, that when we talk about them and think them through, become kind of self-evident. They make sense. But today is a day of holy day of obligation. We need to go to Mass. We need to thank Jesus for giving us his mother, for giving her the gift of her Immaculate Conception, for giving her the grace that she cooperated with to say yes. And, also thank Mary for the yes that she gave, that is playing a role now for us, has brought that sanctifying grace into the world that Jesus gave us. So thank you, Mary, on this day, and may we all give you, honor as a unique human being that has done so much for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In her extreme obedience and humility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. On the other side of the break, Adam, let's talk about the role of women in the church, because I hear it often that, where's a woman's place in the Catholic Church? Can women do more? Can they? And we have the Blessed Mother. I mean, God so beautifully allowed and designed everything, and so the role of women is very clear through you look at the Blessed Mother, and it's incredible. So I struggle sometimes when people in this day and age, especially women, when they're like, oh, well, the Catholic Church it's so male dominated, it's so male this, male that. It's so interesting to me as we focus on the Blessed Mother and the power of the Blessed Mother. And you talk about the Blessed Mother in spiritual warfare and how many exorcists are close to the Blessed Mother, and Marian priests. We know that some of the holiest priests out there are those that are very close to the Blessed Mother. The role of a woman, right? And it's really interesting to me. I struggle with it all the time, and maybe we could just go back and forth and talk about it, because we see it in our church. It's so beautifully designed and set up, and yet people still complain. They still complain. They find a reason to try and take it down or take it apart, and that's unfortunate, because we're missing out in all this beauty and all this extreme spiritual power that we can tap into if we would just like you said, Adam, all the time, focus and be obedient and humble in our ways, and work towards that. Work with God, not against God. Mary always worked with God, and she's our role model. So there's a lot to say about this. I struggle because I'm seeing all these things, especially we're in election time, and you see all these things about the role of women and the power of women, and everybody's out there hyper-focused on all this kind of stuff, and yet we have such the beauty of the role of a woman in our church. So maybe we could talk about that. But Adam, we have to talking about a very powerful woman, Mother Angelica. A lot of our listeners may or may not know this, but today, August 15th, and that would be 43 years ago, Mother Angelica actually founded EWTN in 1980, but the network went on the air August 15th, 1981. Isn't that cool?
That's very cool. I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
And wow, look at the grace that's still moving through it, and it's just grown and grown and grown all over the world now.
Yeah, and she was another one that had such strong obedience and was willing to absolutely receive the inspirations and the messages from God. And she was bold. She was courageous. She led the way. And again, another powerful woman. And we look at all of the female saints we have, incredible saints that we have that were so strong, that fought against so many things, heresies and all sorts of things. And yet people still complain there's not enough of a role for women in the church. I just don't understand it. It makes me frustrated at times. But what do you say about all this, Adam, about the role of women in the church?
Well, Deb, what I was thinking of as you were talking, and yes, of course it's true. I think there is less of a role of women, if we just talk about ordination, priestly ordination. And I know there's some discussion about deacons, and I think that was a no again. But that's based on the way Jesus established his church. That's true within the hierarchy. But in my experience, in these years, God uses women a lot of the time for delivering the spiritual messages, the spiritual guidance to the church. There's been so many female saints that have been so gifted and have brought us teaching and inspiration that has helped the church. Most people don't work in a diocese and are aware of just how much day-to-day worldly distracting work is required to run the organization. I mean, yes, everybody's going to Mass every day and they're keeping up with their prayers. But there is a lot of just day-to-day toil in terms of running things and the endless meetings and all of it. And I'm not complaining, but I'm pointing out that God often uses women that are free from the burden of all of that, more of the worldly side of running the church, to spend more time in prayer. We see so many women that are cloistered, or at least historically were cloistered, who had the ability to dedicate their lives almost completely to prayer. Now, there's been men who had that ability too, but that's like a privileged life that God is giving them, to provide a space and a way for them to live their life with that dedication without worrying about their worldly needs and the distractions of the world. And God's creating that for them through the church, creating these institutions in which they can wholly dedicate themselves to prayer and reflection on Scripture and all the aspects of the spiritual life. And, where do we get our deepest spirituality? From the Carmelite saints, who are two of the heavy hitters amongst the Carmelite saints are Teresa of Avila and Therese of Lisieux. Therese is, has a simple spirituality. That simplicity doesn't mean it's lesser. It's very accessible for the average person. She is one of the most popular saints in all of history because of it, is that it works, it helps, and it's accessible to the average person. And then if you want to go deep, Teresa of Avila, her reflections are incredibly deep. Multiple books of complex, nuanced spirituality designed to help a person and guide them through the deepest layers of contemplation and union with God in prayer and in contemplation in this life. So, and the other Carmelite, of course, we have is John of the Cross, who was a male, of course, and gave us great insight also in a slightly different way, more through poetry, because he said words fail in terms of describing, the things of God as we get deeper. So I would just point out that, yes, on the institutional side of things, kind of the hierarchy of running things day to day, it is largely male to an extent because it's only male priests, and priests fill a lot of those positions and they become bishops and cardinals, etc. But we can't discount the work God is doing with the women that are quietly praying and reflecting and giving the church a lot of her spirituality.
That was well said, and I want to bring it back also to the Blessed Mother, and I just found a beautiful litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary. I'm going to send it to Tim. He's going to post it in addition to the article, the CNA article. But if you look at some of the titles of Mary, I love litanies. I just love litanies. They're so powerful. But you look at some of the titles. These are just some of many of the titles of the Blessed Virgin Mary: Queen of Angels, Queen of Patriarchs, Queen of Prophets, Queen of Apostles, Queen of Martyrs. Queen of Confessors, Queen of Virgins, Queen of all saints. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And this is how for me as a woman, Adam, and I see how God set it up. He set it up so beautifully. I look at, you talk about saints, I look at St. Mary Magdalene. I mean, so many biblical scholars said that, she possibly was the one who funded Jesus's ministry. Okay? I mean, he elevated women. We are elevated in the Catholic Church. I tend to think that other faith beliefs, some of them are completely all male dominated, completely. They don't even acknowledge, the Blessed Mother sometimes, and they don't even acknowledge any female great, even from the Old Testament. I look at the Old Testament, the women of the Bible of the Old Testament, very powerful leaders. God saw that, so he elevates women in everything. He brings them in. And if we can't see that with our spiritual eyes, we are really missing, we're not tapping into it at all, because if we're just looking for power, strength, fame, a good position, we want to be equal to men, we're missing it completely. What do you say to that real quickly before we send it back to Keith?
Well, I think what you're saying, is pointing to a central part of the Catholic faith that, as you say, a lot of people want to reject Mary and her unique role, her uniqueness in her Immaculate Conception, her unique role in terms of the incarnation of Jesus. For Catholics, we understand the male and the feminine as being incredibly important because she had a free will choice.
That's right.
She could say yes or no. And she said yes to God in humility and obedience, having uncertainty. How's this going to impact my life? What's this going to mean? Am I going to be safe? Am I going to be secure? She didn't know any of that. And she said yes, and she participated in the incarnation, raised him, lived with him, raised him to adulthood, and was with him all the way to the cross. Mm-hmm. And we recognize that feminine part, we recognize the whole Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, Jesus. That's right. And that was the formation place for him in his humanity. And then she was with him all the way to the cross. And so for us Catholics, we recognize the importance of the feminine, and she was elevated to Queen of Heaven when she was assumed. If that's not a testament to that women play an important role in God's church and in the world, I don't know what is. Yeah. And so that's why we go to Mary and ask her, please pray to your son, and pray for the things we're asking for, because mm-hmm. just like at the wedding at Cana, when, he was thinking, this isn't my time. It's not my time to do this miracle. And when Mom said, through that look she gave him, it's not recorded a word, but she gave him a look, and then she just said, do what he says. Mm-hmm. And then he said, okay, I'm going to do what Mom wanted. Wow. So, there's a reason that we honor Mary and that we honor the feminine in the Catholic Church.
Amen to that. So, folks, please go to Mass today. It's a holy day of obligation. We're going to send it back to Keith for the rest of Morning Joy.